From communication styles and conflict resolution to external stressors, various factors influence relationships. Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reigeter, and today I'm joined by licensed marriage and family therapist Elizabeth Earnshaw. Join us as we explore the fundamental principles of couples therapy and shed light on the diverse reasons couples seek counseling, dispelling myths along the way. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I just want to check in. How are you really?
I'm actually pretty good today. My kids are having a snow day. We've had multiple snow days this week, and I feel like it's always so fun and it feels like a different type of week when that's happening. So I've gotten to relax, they've gotten to relax, and it's just been really nice.
Oh, I love that. It's really nice when you get that chance to relax. I feel like life is very go, go, go when you get a moment to just breathe.
Yeah.
And when you get the beautiful view of the snow. I've never seen snow. So to me, that sounds like the most magical, amazing thing in the world to get to look outside your window and see snow.
Yeah. And like literally actually being trapped at home. We can't leave, so we can't be on the go. So, it's nice. It makes you feel frozen in time. So it's good.
So with snow, is it really like you have to plow the driveway like in the movies? Like you can't leave. It's really difficult.
Yeah, so at least where we live, I mean, if you live maybe in an area where the houses are closer together, the town would come more quickly to get everything done. But we have a pretty long driveway and we live in a more suburban rural area. So our road hasn't been plowed yet. So we're just stuck. And last night they made an announcement for everybody to get off the roads because it was starting. So yeah, we've just been stuck here. It's nice. It's cozy.
I love that. I can't wait to one day get to a place where I can see snow, but for now, I'm going back and forth with Florida and California and doing my master's in clinical psychology. And this semester, we're really focused on marriage and family therapy, as that's what my license will be. So I'm really excited for this conversation because we are going to talk about couples therapy. So for those who don't know what couples therapy is or might look like, could you give us like a brief kind of rundown on what it is?
Yeah. So when people come to couples therapy, they come to couples therapy for a lot of different reasons. One of the things before we started recording that you had mentioned was people think it's only if you're on the verge of getting a divorce or there's been really something significant, like maybe an affair discovery or something like that. Of course, I see people for those reasons, but more often than not, I would say most people come in because they're feeling kind of disconnected from each other or they've been having arguments over and over and over again and they're not at the point of divorce but they're exhausted by it and they want things to feel better. I see people because they have a big decision to make. I see people who are navigating grief together, so perhaps they've had somebody close to both of them die, or perhaps one of them is chronically ill and they're trying to navigate what that looks like to them. So people come to couples therapy for all different reasons. And when you come into couples therapy, depending on the therapist, it looks different, right? So for some people, you might go in, and a lot of people, this is what they say they've experienced. They experience more of a you go in, you talk a lot, somebody's kind of just listening, and maybe they give you a little bit of feedback, but there doesn't feel like there's a lot of direction. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people practicing couples therapy who say that they are couples therapists, but they're not truly trained to do it. And so that's what it'll feel like. There's just not really a lot of engagement interaction. When you're seeing a therapist who has been trained specifically for couples therapy, though, it should feel incredibly engaging. There should be a lot of after the first few sessions where you're being interviewed, there should be a lot of stopping you, giving you feedback, asking you to try something a different way, and really pushing you to kind of develop insight about yourself or the other person. And then, of course, figuring out solutions to whatever's going on, or new ways of being with each other.
Finding the right therapist who's properly trained and is right for you and your partner or loved one is so important. What are some kind of questions that maybe you can ask a therapist to gauge if they're the right one for you?
If you're looking for couples therapy, the first thing I would ask is, have you been trained in couples therapy? So a lot of therapists have been trained in individual therapy, but they add couples therapy on as another service. And if they say yes, I would ask them in what ways. So there's lots of different types of couples therapy. There's emotionally focused couples therapy. There is Gottman couples therapy. There is PACT, which is psychobiological approach to couples therapy. There's relational life therapy. So if they can give you one of those names, then it means that likely they've actually been trained, right? If they can say, I went through the relational life therapy program. The other thing that you might want to look for is, if they are not an LMFT, LMFT means you went specifically for couples therapy and family therapy. So if they're an LMFT, you know that that's all they went to school for, and that they know pretty much what they're doing in terms of couples and families. But if they're not an LMFT, if they're a licensed social worker or counselor, any of those things, you really want to make sure they've gotten some extra training to work with couples. And then you kind of want to figure out, are they going to match our vibe as a couple? So they've got the training, they know how to do couples therapy, but is this going to be the person for us? And some of the things to figure out is, what's their approach? Do we like a more direct person? So I tend to work with a lot of people who are, quote, high achievers, and they're really looking for a therapist who's direct, who's going to give them feedback, who's going to tell them, this is what I want you to do. And so if that's you, you want to ask the therapist, do you tend to be direct? Do you tend to intervene? What do you do? If you tend to be people who are maybe more insight oriented and you like to think about feelings and talk more about feelings, you might want to ask them, how do you do couples therapy? And if they say, I focus on emotions and I focus on helping you to understand how each other feel, that would be somebody that's good for you. So asking about what you're looking for in terms of who you are as people, I think is really important too.
That is so important. I was watching a TV show the other day, and there was a couple going to couples therapy, and it was this the female in the relationship was expecting the therapist to only agree with her and kind of go after the husband to get him to do what she wants. And I think that's just a misconception people have, is that they're going to be on one
Yeah.
person's side, not the other person's side. And when you're looking for a therapist, it's important to be asking these questions and to see how they're going to help us work together. Because in the end, the goal is not for one person to win, it's for the couple to grow together.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there's a huge misconception um, by people who seek couples therapy that it is going to be a place where the therapist is going to side with somebody. And so, for the person who thinks they're going to be sided against, they will avoid couples therapy. They'll say, I'm not going in there. It's just because you want to get this person on your side and you're going to gang up on me. And for the person who's seeking out the therapy, who wants the therapist to side with them, they're really doing themselves a disservice because they're not actually entering in with a willingness to see the entire picture. Now, there are times where there is wrongdoing, right? And so there's another misconception that a therapist would never, ever speak up about something, right? Um, and I, as a therapist, certainly do. So if I'm seeing abusive behavior, I'm not going to say, oh, there's two sides to this story and like, let's figure out what this is. I am very direct and I say, the way that you're speaking right now is really abusive. Like, what do you think about me telling you that? Does it mean I'm siding with the other person? No, but it does mean that I will ask both people to take accountability for the ways in which they're behaving. And that doesn't always look like the maybe like soft, floofy stereotype of a therapist. Sometimes you're going to hear hard things in therapy too. And I would say couples therapy is kind of challenging because of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. People think that it's either going to be one-sided or it's going to be just agreeing with us and everything's perfect. And that's what we want to hear, right? Going into
Yeah.
couples therapy, we either want to hear like, you guys are great, you're a perfect couple, everything's perfect, or that this person's wrong, they need to change. And when you don't have those kind of proper goals going into couples therapy or this open mindset, it's really hard to get anything out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when people enter in with that mindset, it can be kind of challenging because it's not what they expected. I do find, though, that even if they come in with that, if you can kind of help them to understand what's actually going to be happening and why it's important, that most people like it better the other way anyway. Most people deep down, they do want accountability. They do want to understand themselves. They do want to show up differently in a relationship so that it can improve. And so once that's explained and those stereotypes are removed, people tend to do pretty well.
On that note, what are some of the goals that people might set when going to couples therapy?
There's a lot of goals. I would say, obviously, when people first come in, they tend to say the more cliche goal of we want to improve our communication. And when they talk about that, and I'm sure you talked about this in your classes, is something that's important is clarifying what does that mean? Because for some, saying I want to improve communication means I want us to fight less. I want us to be calm when we're talking about difficult issues. For other people, it means I just want us to talk. We never hang out anymore. We don't share information. We're not really friends anymore. And so it's really important for us to figure out what that means. So they usually start with, I want the goal of improving communication. And, within a few sessions, they kind of finesse that a little bit. And it could be anything from, I want us to connect more to, I want us to learn how to regulate ourselves when we're in conversations because we tend to get dysregulated. Um, there's also a pretty common goal of figuring out, do we even want to be together? So a lot of people will come in, they'll have a lot going on. They'll think initially that their goal for couples therapy is we just want to communicate better. And then once they get down to it, what they're really wanting to figure out is, would we ever be able to communicate well? Are we supposed to be together? Can we make this work? And then for some people, a goal might be something about intimacy. So we want to have sex more. We want to find ways to spend more time together. And then I would say the other common goal has to do around disagreements. So how do we get on the same page? How do we decide if we want to have kids? How do we decide if we're going to move? How do we decide how money is spent? And so people will come in with the goal of we want to get on the same page and we want to be able to move forward with some sort of agreements together.
These are really important goals. In my class the other day, my teacher asked us, "What do you think a good goal for couples therapy is?" And I was like, "Communication." And he was like,
Yeah,
"Well, what kind of communication?" And that was the first time I ever thought about it. So I love that you bring that up because it's so important that we're specific in what we're looking for, whether you're the therapist or the client, right? Knowing that I want to have more frequent and deep conversations. I want to feel like I'm connecting with you and we can be vulnerable.
yes,
Or we're fighting a lot and that's impacting every aspect of our home life. And we want to learn how to communicate with more respect for each other and learn to listen to each other and respond with empathy. So being
yeah,
able to understand exactly what you're looking for is huge. And then I love the point of these big life decisions, right? Talking about finances, moving. A lot of people have this misconception that they have to figure it out on their own,
yeah,
and they feel guilty if they don't agree with what their partner wants to do. So being
yes.
to go to couples therapy and have that place of support to talk about it and communicate and having someone there is kind of like a third party to help you both see each other's perspectives and communicate without starting to fight or feel attacked can be huge.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking, I was starting to think when people come in with decision issues, they either come in early on when they're just starting to think about it. And they might say something in couples therapy like, the conversation of kids just started coming up and we're not really sure what we want to do with that. And so we realized we should talk to somebody right away. However, I would say more often people come in when that decision has been a pain point for a long time. And so perhaps they never really agreed on whether they should have kids, but then they ended up getting pregnant, they had a kid, and now they're about to have their second kid. And they're coming in and they're saying, we never actually discussed this. We never made a decision truly. I mean, we made a decision because these things happened, but we didn't make a decision out loud about whether we want kids or not. And now I really resent my partner because I kept telling my partner, I don't even know if I want one kid. And now for some reason we're having two, right? Or they might say something like, I don't feel like I've ever agreed to the fact that we're getting the kitchen redone, but yet the kitchen's being redone right now. And I feel like no matter what I say, it doesn't matter what I say about money. My partner is spending the money anyway. And we never agree on this. And so they're in therapy for two reasons at this point. One is they need to learn how to make decisions together around that topic. How do we make decisions about kids? How do we make decisions about money? But now they also have resentment. And so a big thing that comes into the room in couples therapy is resentment. They're there for the goal of we want better communication. We want more sex. We want to be on the same page about money. But before we can even get there, we're often having to process resentment. We're not going to get to an agreement because you resent your partner so much that now resentment is in this conversation too. And so most people don't say, I want the goal to be to get over resentment, but the first goal often ends up being, we have to figure out how you're going to get over this. We have to figure out how you're not going to hold this against your partner forever. And then we can start to move forward.
Resentment can absolutely impact every aspect of a relationship, from the way you communicate to your intimacy, to be able to just stand being in the room together, to have
Yeah.
respect
Yeah.
for each other. So understanding where resentment is starting, hopefully preventing it by going to couples therapy early. But if you're coming in with that resentment, is this something I'm willing to work toward? It's a really big conversation to have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When it comes to resentment or lack of quality communication, lack of listening, um, difficulties with intimacy. How can we see those really impacting a relationship, that someone may recognize some of those warning signs like, hey, this is more than what we can handle. We do need a third party to help us before it continues to progress.
When there are issues that haven't been resolved, there's usually a pattern that people start to follow. So, one is they start to get into really negative conflict cycles. And so, if you notice that you are having a conflict cycle that does not feel good over and over and over again, and it's predictable, that's usually a warning sign that you and your partner are probably not going to figure this out on your own, that you probably need a third party. What I mean by conflict cycle is that you will recognize that it feels the same way every single time and that it is unproductive every single time. And so that might look like you try to bring up an issue. Hey, I think we should really talk about, how are we going to get our debt down? And then your partner does the same thing in response to that every time. So maybe when you bring up an issue, every single time your partner turns against you and is like, there you go again. Why are you bringing this up? And then you respond to them doing that the same way every time. And so maybe they turn against you and you say, well, fine, I'm not going to bring it up now. I'm just going to do whatever I want. And you withdraw and shut down. So if you're noticing patterns of withdrawal or attacking each other, and it gets, over time, it starts to become more quick too. Maybe in the beginning it was we could talk about it for 15 minutes and then we would attack and withdraw. But maybe now it's like as soon as you bring the topic up, you start attacking and withdrawing. So if you're noticing that there is attacking and withdrawing going every time you try to talk about difficult things, you've gotten stuck, you've gotten embedded into a conflict cycle that is very hard to break because now it's just a pattern. So sometimes that can be a warning sign. Another thing that's a warning sign is if you notice that when you're communicating with each other, you're using what's called the four horsemen. I'm sure you've talked about that in couples therapy classes, but John Gottman, he came up with this concept of the four horsemen after he watched couples for decades since the 70s. And he found that couples who are in trouble, he calls them the disasters of relationships. They become disasters because they use these four habits. They use criticism, they utilize defensiveness, they utilize stonewalling, which in layman's terms is the silent treatment essentially, and they utilize contempt, which is belittling and sarcasm and like looking down and sneering at your partner. If you are doing these things chronically, and I say chronically because we all do these things sometimes. I mean, my husband and I are very happy, and I probably at some point today already have been defensive or critical in some weird way, right? But if every time you're trying to talk about something, all you're doing is going back and forth with like, you always blah, 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 blah. And the other person's like, yeah, but the reason I do that is this. If that's the only way you're talking and you are not showing curiosity, you're not actually getting anywhere, then that is a problem. And the four horsemen, when they are used chronically, they can predict that there is going to be the end of the relationship. There's going to be a divorce or a separation, or distance. And so if you're noticing those, obviously you want to get help. And then the final thing I would say that you want to pay attention to is distance. And so when we get together with somebody, we do not get together with them because we're distant from them. We are not together because we like one of us sitting in the basement and the other one sitting up in the bedroom and not talking. We are not together because we want to spend every waking moment at work, and then at the gym, and then at the bar, instead of actually spending 20 minutes with our partner. So when you start to notice that there is more distance than there is time together or commitment to making time together, then that's usually a sign that something's also kind of brewing under the surface, and you might want some help with that.
Those are really, really great points to pull out. And I love how you talked about the normalcy of sometimes we communicate with criticism or we get defensive. We're human beings, human behaviors, but when it's really impacting the relationship, when it's the only way you're communicating, that's when it gets unhealthy. So not for people listening to think, oh, we had one little bicker this morning, we're doomed. It's learning how much of it's healthy, how much of it is being a human, how much of it is not being able to communicate or connect with your partner, and what can you do about it? Are you willing to do something about it?
Yeah.
And for me, a big thing that comes up is watching TV shows and movies, and you see these relationships where it's been kind of normalized that people are fighting all the time and they can't stand each other and they're breaking up, getting back together, breaking up, getting back together, and these are considered the big love stories and kind of normalizing, right? And then we're normalizing this is
Yeah.
appropriate behavior. If my partner leaves me and then comes back to me and leaves me and comes back to me, it's romantic. And
Yeah.
recognizing that what you see on TV might not be the healthiest behavior and you don't have to mimic that. That's really important.
Yes, and I think that sometimes we're not even conscious of how we're mimicking that or seeking that out. And I do think that socially, there's a lot that is at a very young age kind of ingrained that love looks like constant passion.
Yeah.
And what constant passion looks like sometimes is dysregulation, right? I'm so dysregulated that I'm screaming at you to get out of the house. And I'm so dysregulated that I'm chasing you around the house and saying, please talk to me. Even though you told me you want to break up with me, I love you so much. And I lit candles all over the house to tell you how much I love you. And so we start to think that being dysregulated with each other has to do with love. Um, but really, dysregulation is one of the most harmful things in a relationship. And you cannot live within that constantly. And while at the beginning, you might have a lot of those excited feelings and passion, after a while, that's going to go away because that stuff is hormonal. It is not going to just stay at a baseline in that way. And so you might start to seek out that dysregulation with each other instead to get the excitement. And it's important to be aware of that.
What are maybe some key questions someone can reflect on for themselves to see, is this us? Are we having emotional dysregulation that's impacting our relationship? Is this something we should address?
Yeah. So when people are emotionally dysregulated, in conflict, what they'll find is that like they say things they don't mean. I mean, all of these things might be pretty obvious, but if you're sitting and thinking about it in terms of dysregulation, it can help. So say things you don't mean, say too much. So you're not able to take pauses. The way this really shows up in current times is just too many text messages. So you get into an argument or you're nervous that you can't figure out what the other person is thinking. And so you keep texting your thoughts or questions or whatever it is. You're not giving that space. It can also look like being completely shut down. So somebody's trying to communicate with you and you're not responding. You stomp out of the room. They text you and you just completely ignore their messages. So when we're thinking about it, we're thinking of anything on either end of the spectrum, completely shut down or completely activated. So I need to talk. I need to say more. I'm going to say things I don't mean. I'm trying to perturb you so that you talk to me, or I need you to leave me alone. I don't know how to get you to do that unless I completely shut down. So I'm going to stonewall you, silent treatment you. Um, I'm going to take on lots of projects, so I'm busy and I don't have to talk to you. All of those things are signs that you're actually dysregulated. And because you're dysregulated, you can't come to the middle and be assertive and direct and kind and present. Instead, you're all over the place.
I love the example of the text messages because that's something we can all relate to, right? Is when you send 2 million text messages and you're like, I'm just trying to communicate. Why aren't they answering? And the other person's like, I can't speak to this person right now. I need to put my phone on do not disturb and walk away. And
Yeah.
recognizing when that's happening and that's happening frequently, maybe you have one fight happens once and never happens again. You talk about it after communicating, able to work through that and make a promise to each other to not do that. But if this is the way you're communicating constantly, anytime that a disagreement comes up, anytime just that's the way you communicate, it is very detrimental to the relationship and it's detrimental to both people's mental health because one
Yeah.
person's genuinely thinking they don't want to talk to me and I'm trying to communicate, they don't care about me. And the other person's genuinely thinking, why won't they leave me alone? I need my space. They don't care about me. And when that's
Yeah.
happening and we're not communicating, it really can destroy not just the relationship, but the people themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what both people in those moments are looking for is security. And all of this regulation is making both people anxious, right? So the core of this is anxiety on both ends. It just looks different. And so if you're trying to improve this, one thing to keep in mind is my goal here is to create security in our relationship. Does it create security if I keep berating my partner by messaging? Does it create security if I'm following them around the house saying, you better talk to me? No. Does it create security if I'm ignoring my partner? Or if my partner says something like, I just need you to tell me you love me. We can fight, but and you say, well, I can't say that right now. Is that creating security? No. These behaviors, they do not create safety and security relationally. They are behaviors that are related to feeling at risk. So I feel at risk because you're not answering me or we're not agreeing or whatever it is. So we are trying to create security within ourselves with the behaviors. If I can just get them to say something back, I'm going to feel calm. If I can just get them not, to leave me alone and I can go sit in the basement for an hour and block them out, I'm going to feel safe and calm. So they're very it's about preserving the self in those moments. In an abusive relationship, that might be necessary, but in a relationship that you actually want to work, and in a relationship where you love each other and you don't want all of this BS to be going on anymore, your goal needs to be security for the relationship. And so, security for the relationship sometimes means, whew, I am really anxious. But I know if I keep going on and on and on, I am not making this relationship a safe place to be. So I've got to calm myself down. What can I do in order to calm myself down? Or I'm really anxious. I just want to get away from this person. But I know if I do that, I am indicating, whether I want to or not, that I'm not always going to be here. And I'm indicating that I'm not reliable. And so by doing that, I'm making this relationship unsafe. How do I make it safe? You know what? I do need that break, but I'm going to tell my partner, I love you and I will be up in 20 minutes. And then actually I will come up. So you have to work on, I'm going to regulate myself. And maybe that means I need a break. Maybe it means I have to write a whole bunch of things down in a journal, or go for a run to get all my activation out. But at the end of the day, I have to be thinking holistically. I see myself, I see I'm anxious, but I also see I'm harming this other person if I don't learn how to regulate myself.
It's so important to learn how to regulate yourself. And if it's something that you're listening to this and you feel like you can't do on your own, you don't have to. That's what couples therapy is for. That's what
Yeah.
therapy is for in general, to help you learn different skills and tools that you need. You don't have to be in crisis. You don't have to be at the brink of divorce. It doesn't have to be the end of the world situation. It could be, I need support in learning to regulate my emotions. I need support in learning how to set a boundary, how to ask for help, how to communicate what I'm looking for to this person. It's more than just I'm in crisis. And as we normalize that, I think a lot of relationships can see more healthier turns that help support both people's mental health.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for joining me today as we are wrapping up. What's one takeaway for maybe a couple who's listening to this and they're like, you know what? We actually could use some better communication. we need to strengthen our relationship. What's maybe a first step they can take as they are searching for a therapist that's right for them?
I think that one piece that's really important is just kind of congratulating yourselves for even knowing that there's an issue. I think it can be scary to notice that there's an issue. And so sometimes it feels like something you need to like not look at. But if you can remind yourself, this is a big deal that I'm able to recognize that something isn't right. And I'm brave enough to say it and I'm brave enough to look at it, that already means you're on the right path. I remember one time I was in individual therapy and I brought up something and I was like, I just feel like, me noticing this, it's never going to change. And like maybe something's really wrong with me. And I remember my therapist saying, the fact that you're even saying it out loud, the fact that you've even taken the energy and the time and the courage to talk about it means that actually you have a higher likelihood of this improving because you're dealing with it. And so it's the same for couples. You've said it out loud, it might be kind of scary, but now you have a higher likelihood that your relationship's going to improve because unlike the people who ignore it and pretend like it's not there, you are actually saying it exists and I want to do something about it. And that's huge.
Admitting it is always the first step. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining me. How can people connect and learn more about you?
So you can find out about me on my website, which is elizabeth.earnshaw.com. So it's just my name. So it's easy to find. I'm on Instagram at Liz Listens. And I also have a book called I Want This to Work, which is pretty much an overview of what I do in couples therapy, but written for a couple so that you could go through it and you could learn different exercises to do with each other to improve your relationship.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.